Power-on stalls are one of the hardest maneuvers to master, and I personally believe that this is due to a lie that's been spread in the aviation training community. Today on Free Pilot Training, I'm going to expose that lie, and then I'm going to show you in detail how to master the power-on stall. Welcome to Free Pilot Training. I'm Josh, and this is my father-in-law, Mike. And I'm headed out to the practice area today to work on some power-on stalls. One of the most important things to consider when performing any stall is safety. Unfortunately, that's probably how this lie got its start. Someone developed an incorrect theory on the aerodynamics of a stall, and the rest of the community got the crap scared out of them because of the possible ramifications of that theory. Now, I'm going to go into detail on that here in just a minute. But first, let's talk about the power-on stall, what it is, and what we're trying to accomplish with this maneuver.
As you may remember, a stall is simply a rapid loss of lift that is caused by the disruption of airflow over the wings. And this disruption of airflow is caused by exceeding the wing's critical angle of attack. Now, I think everyone here knows how important lift is to flying an airplane. And sometimes we want to decrease the amount of lift that our airplane is producing. Landing is one example of when we'd want to do that, but a rapid loss of lift is not good. So unintentional stalls are something that we try to avoid. Now, we know how dangerous a stall or a sudden loss of lift can be, but there are some places where a stall can be extremely dangerous, and one of those times is during takeoff. Because of that, we practice the recovery procedures for a takeoff stall at a higher and much safer altitude, where we have more time to react. Wouldn't that suck if we actually practiced these during the actual takeoff roll? You'd think the pilot shortage now is bad. Anyway, we practice these recovery procedures for a couple reasons. First, we want pilots to be able to know when they're getting close to a stall. If you recognize that you're about to stall and you fix it before it happens, you've completely avoided a dangerous situation, and your passengers didn't have to clean out their pants. The second reason is to develop your muscle memory as a pilot. If you do accidentally stall during a takeoff, it's going to be second nature to break that stall and recover the airplane. So we call this practice maneuver the power-on stall. And I guess we call it that because during the takeoff roll, you should have full power in, and the airplane should be in a takeoff configuration. This means that you'll most likely have the flaps up. Now, there are some takeoffs when you'll have one or two notches of flaps in, depending on the type of aircraft that you're flying. But typically, you're going to practice these with your flaps up. Okay, now that we know what a power-on stall is, let's talk about getting set up for the maneuver and how you're going to be graded on your check ride. You can find this table in the Private Pilot Airman Certification Standards. If you want to pass your check ride, this document tells you everything you need to know and do to make that happen. What you'll find here is a list of things that you need to know, but you'll also be expected to use good risk management. And that simply means that you need to know how to avoid dangerous situations. Along with that, you need to actually be able to perform the maneuver to these standards right here. So the first thing we need to do is to pick a good altitude to accomplish the maneuver. For a single engine airplane, we need to end the maneuver no lower than 1,500 feet AGL. Now for a power-on stall, you typically don't lose much altitude, if any, because the nose of your aircraft will be pitched way up while you're waiting on the airplane to stall. While that's happening, you're going to be climbing quite a bit. I still wouldn't start the maneuver less than 2,000 feet AGL just to be safe. Most instructors like their students to be at least 3,000 feet AGL, and I think that's totally reasonable. The next thing we need to do is to clear the area. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and knock out a couple clearing turns and continue to clear throughout the entire maneuver. Then just get yourself on a good heading. Don't pick a random heading like 030 or 150. Pick one of the cardinal headings like north, south, east, or west. Make this as easy on yourself as possible. While you're pointing the airplane in a good direction, think about what's in front of you. Is there any airspace, terrain, towers, or... Yes, even Godzilla. If there's something in that direction, pick another heading. There's no time limit on getting set up for the maneuver. Now it's time to configure for the maneuver. The evaluator can ask you to start from a few different configurations, but students typically find the takeoff configuration the most difficult, so I like to have students run the before takeoff checklist to get themselves set up. Once you're ready to go, slow down to your rotation speed. On Cessna 172s, that's about 52 knots. This is going to seem a little bit weird because on an actual takeoff, you're going to be speeding up to 52 knots, not slowing down. But if you don't slow down to your rotation speed, this maneuver is going to be 10 times harder because when you pitch the nose of the airplane up, that airspeed all has to bleed off before your airplane will stall. Once you reach rotation speed, go ahead and set your power. Now the evaluator can allow you to set as little as 65% power, but full power is the most difficult power setting, so I recommend practicing with max power as much as possible. Next, smoothly pitch the nose of your aircraft up and continue past your normal takeoff attitude. In a Cessna 172 at full power, the nose has to be pitched up really high. I like to put the crotch of the windshield right on the horizon and just keep it there. This is where this maneuver starts to get really difficult because we need to maintain our heading within 10 degrees. And this is where the big lie comes into play. I don't know how many times I've heard it, and I even believed it for the longest time. Do not use ailerons during a power-on stall. You should only use the rudder pedals to make corrections during this part of a stall. This is the biggest lie in aviation, guys. Now please don't turn off this video without hearing me out. My brand new students out there watching this are probably wondering why you'd even want to practice a stall without using ailerons. So let's back up and talk about this for a little bit. To do that, we need to take a closer look at the wing of an airplane and how the ailerons actually work. As you may remember, the way we get an airplane to roll is by moving the ailerons. When I lower the aileron on this side, this wing creates more lift. And when I lower the aileron on this side, the aileron on the opposite side goes up and creates less lift. This in turn rolls the aircraft, but there's a small aerodynamic problem with this design. When this aileron moves down on one of the wings, this creates more drag on that side of the aircraft. And because of that, this side of the airplane gets pulled back. And this causes the airplane to yaw in the opposite direction of the turn. This is what we refer to as adverse yaw. Now we control the yaw axis of our airplane with rudder pedals. So what that means to you is that anytime you bank the airplane in a direction, you need to use the rudder pedal on the same side to counteract adverse yaw. Let me simplify. Anytime you use the ailerons, you need to also use the rudders as if they're tied to the ailerons to keep the airplane from yawing away from the turn. We want to keep the tail aligned with the nose of the aircraft. This is what your instructor's talking about when he's saying, stay coordinated or center that dumb ball. In fact, anyone here ever seen one of these before? It's called an air coupe. These planes were originally designed without rudder pedals. They designed these so that the rudders were tied to the aileron controls to counteract adverse yaw. The pilot could simply fly around crisscross applesauce without a care in the world. Not sure what they do about the left-turning tendencies and crosswind landings, but that's another topic. Now here's the problem. At slower airspeeds, the ailerons start losing their effectiveness. There's not as much relative wind going over the wings. So when you lower an aileron, there's less wind going over it, so it can't create as much lift on one side to create that roll movement you want when you turn the yoke in that direction. In addition to that, when you fly at high angles of attack, like we do during a power-on stall, the airflow on the backside of this aileron is also disrupted, and that makes the ailerons even less effective. Both of these things are facts. Ailerons are less effective at slow airspeeds and high angles of attack, but the rudder is only affected by slow airspeeds. It's not really affected by high angles of attack. So at high angles of attack, we can maintain more control authority with the rudder than we can with the ailerons. So yes, the rudders are very important to us at high angles of attack. I'd say even more important than the ailerons. But at high angles of attack, there are some that would say that those ailerons are downright dastardly. If you use those at high angles of attack, you'll most assuredly kill us all. Now we all know that when we're practicing stalls, we're super close to our critical angle of attack. And the moment we exceed that critical angle of attack, the airplane will stall. But some people believe that by moving the ailerons too much, you could potentially exceed the critical angle of attack on one wing before the other. And this could result in a violent wing drop on one side, while the other wing is still producing lift. Ultimately, this could result in a spin, and of course nobody wants that unless you're intentionally trying to spin the aircraft. So it seems understandable that they'd be concerned about using ailerons at high angles of attack. But let's go to Josh, who's on scene to show you an important design feature found in most straight-wing aircraft to keep something like this from happening. Josh, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Josh.
Now I'm here today to show you old X-ray. Now this aircraft, like a lot of other straight wing aircraft, has a really important design feature. It may be difficult to tell from this footage, but X-ray was designed so that the inner part of the wing, or the wing root, is always at a higher angle of attack than the rest of the wing. This means that the wing root will exceed its critical angle of attack before the rest of the wing. And because of that, the wing root will actually stall before the rest of the wing. And it's intentionally designed that way so that the ailerons maintain some effectiveness during high angles of attack. Wow, those engineers thought of everything. Back to you, Josh. Thanks, Josh, but it seems like they may not be entirely convinced. Let's read an excerpt from the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. In most straight-wing aircraft, the wing is designed to stall at the wing root first. The wing root reaches its critical angle of attack first, making the stall progress outward toward the wingtip. By having the wing root stall first, aileron effectiveness is maintained at the wingtips, maintaining controllability of the aircraft. Various design methods are used to achieve the stalling of the wing root first. In one design, the wing is twisted to a higher angle of attack at the wing root. Installing stall strips on the first 20 to 24% of the wing's leading edge is another method to induce a stall prematurely. So as you can see here, most aircraft are intentionally designed so you can maintain control of the aircraft with ailerons right up until the time the airplane stalls. Okay, if this is true, how do we need to control our airplane? Well, let's go back to where we left off. Let's see, where were we? Oh yeah, we're at a rotation speed of 52 knots, and we're pitching the nose of the airplane up to put that window crotch right on the horizon, and we're feeding in full power at the same time. Now remember, we just said that our ailerons are not very effective at these low air speeds and these high angles of attack. So to make things easier on yourself, 1, wait till you hit your rotation speed before you start pitching the nose up, and 2, pitch up at the same time you're feeding that power in. If you put the power in first and you just sit there and scratch your rear end for a minute, or you forget to slow down, when you pitch the nose up, it's going to take forever to bleed off that airspeed. Remember, we have to maintain our heading within 10 degrees during this maneuver. So if you're struggling to maintain your heading during power on stalls, I promise this little tip will help you out. Now you're controlling the airplane with ailerons and rudder together, almost as if they're tied together because of that adverse yaw we talked about a minute ago. Adverse yaw is strongest at low air speeds, and we're going to be pretty stinking slow, so you need to be very firm on the rudders. In addition to that, we're flying at low airspeed and high power setting, so the left turning tendencies are going to be at their absolute worst. And this is a huge reason why people struggle with this maneuver. It almost seems like students can't physically keep right rudder pressure in while still accounting for adverse yaw. To fix that, this is how I want you to think about it. This is 0 now, like 1 to 2 inches of right rudder pressure. Then tie the rudder pedals to the ailerons in your mind. That's the key here. If you don't do that and you get yourself uncoordinated and you don't keep the tail aligned with the nose, this is where things start getting really dangerous, because this is a recipe for a spin. According to the Airplane Flying Handbook, a spin occurs when at least one of the airplane's wings exceeds the critical angle of attack with a side slip or yaw acting on the airplane at or beyond the stall. So according to this, if you allow one or both wings to exceed their critical angle of attack, and you have a yaw or a side slip on the airplane, in other words, you're uncoordinated, there's a good chance that the airplane could enter a spin. And if you do this during a takeoff close to the ground, you will most likely die. Now we're just chilling here with our nose pitched way up, and we're waiting for this thing to stall. At this point, I'm focused on 3 main things. First, I'm trying to keep these little window crotches frozen on the horizon. And what you're going to find is that you need to slowly increase the backstick pressure on the yoke to keep them frozen there. That's because our elevator is creating less and less downforce as the airplane continues to slow. And you need to pull back more and more. I'm also watching my heading, and I'm using ailerons with coordinated rudder to keep my heading where it needs to be. I'm going back and forth from my heading to the little window corners, and I'm taking quick glances at my ball to make sure I'm staying coordinated. Now I mentioned that we're controlling our heading with coordinated use of ailerons and rudder. And at high angles of attack and slow airspeeds, this starts getting really difficult because our ailerons and rudder lose effectiveness. And so every student out there has a tendency to make 2 mistakes. First, they let themselves get uncoordinated because they aren't mentally tying the rudders to the ailerons in their mind. Second, they're over-controlling the aircraft by using too much aileron. Here's the key to using ailerons at high angles of attack and slow airspeeds. You're literally balancing the airplane on its longitudinal axis. Well, why is that important? Have you ever tried balancing a broomstick on the tip of your finger? As you may have noticed, the initial movements of your hand need to be very small to keep the broom from tipping over. But if the broom starts to tilt in one direction or another, it can take a big movement from your hand to keep it from falling over. What you may not have noticed is what your hand did to keep the broom from moving in the opposite direction. As soon as you make a big movement, to keep the broom balanced, a movement in the opposite direction was needed immediately after to keep the broom from starting a trajectory in the opposite direction. The same thing applies for balancing an aircraft on its longitudinal axis. If you need to make a large control input, you need to immediately take half of it back out. This is going to allow you to keep the airplane balanced while at these slow airspeeds and high angles of attack, because you're balancing the airplane on its longitudinal axis when you're trying to keep the wings level and when you're trying to maintain your heading. Now we're waiting for the airplane to stall, and right before it stalls, you're going to start seeing some weird stuff happen. And this is where you really need to start paying attention. Before the airplane completely stalls, the first thing you're going to notice is what we just discussed. The controls are going to get super mushy. Remember, our controls are losing effectiveness, especially the ailerons. In addition to that, you might notice that things start to get quieter as the airplane begins to slow, and the wind around it starts to make less noise. Up to this point, your spidey senses should begin to tingle, but the real concern is when we start to get wing buffeting. At this point, the air is starting to become disrupted over the surface of the top of the wing, and you can actually feel this in the airplane. To me, this feels like tiny elephants dancing on the upper surface of the wing, and when you hear and feel this, it's an indication that you're entering an impending stall. Another indication of an impending stall would be the stall horn or stall light if your airplane has one of those. This is important to know for two reasons. First, you need to recognize that you're getting close to a stall. And by calling these things out as they're happening, it lets the examiner know that you're recognizing the impending stall. Second, you may be asked to recover the airplane after the first indication of a stall. In almost all situations, the first indication of a stall is going to be either wing buffeting or the stall horn on your airplane, or the stall light for my Cherokee fans out there. If you're told to recover at the first indication of a stall, and you let the airplane get into a full stall, technically the examiner could fail you. So start learning to recognize and call out wing buffeting and the horn. With that in mind, I usually have my students practice full stalls more often because they're harder to master, but you really need to mix things up and practice both of them. Okay, so as we're starting to slow down and we start getting the indications of an impending stall, listen to how I call these out.
Okay, so the way I like to start this power on stall is I like to start with the before takeoff checklist. And the reason for that is because with the power on stall, we're starting in the takeoff configuration. So let's go ahead and get set up for takeoff. Seatbelts on, fuel selective valve on both. We'll go ahead and set the trim a little bit lower there. We're going to leave the landing and taxi lights off. Carb heat's off, mixture best power. Everything over there looks good. We are ready to go. Alright, so I'm going to head and get myself set up on a northbound heading here. I might re-slave this puppy real quick just to make sure we're slaved. It's actually not too bad. Alright, there's north. Alright, get set up on this heading. And now we've run the before takeoff checklist, we're ready to go. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to slow the airplane down. So I'm making sure I'm on a good altitude. So we want to end this maneuver no lower than 1,500 feet AGL. I'm at 3,000 feet to start this maneuver, so we got plenty of altitude right now, so we don't have to worry about that. So good airspeed, good altitude, good heading. I'm on a northbound heading. I'm going to go ahead and back that power off. This is going to make it a lot easier to perform this maneuver by backing this power off. As soon as I hit my rotate speed of 55 knots, I'll start feeding in that power. Gently pitch the nose up. Well, I've already got an impending stall. I've got the horn. Now let's listen for wing buffeting. I feel wing buffeting. So max, relax, roll out if you're in a turn, nose down gently, and then back up on the horizon. So I recovered from an impending stall there. the first indication was the stall horn. The second indication was wing buffeting. All right, flaps up, landing and taxi lights off, after takeoff checklist is complete. So I recovered the stall, actually recovered on the second indication, but if the DPE tells you that he wants to see you recover on the first indication, in that case, it would have been the stall horn.
Okay, you just saw how I recognized the impending stall. I called out the indicators and I recovered before we got into a full stall. In a real-world situation where we're taking off, this is how we want to fix the problem. If I'm on the takeoff roll and I lift my nose up too quickly, I do not want to wait until the full stall. Fix the problem before you get yourself into a bad situation. That's the whole point in practicing this maneuver. Now, to recover the airplane, it doesn't matter if we're recovering from an impending stall or a full stall. The procedures are exactly the same. And I like to use the same mantra as I do for the power off stalls. Max, relax, roll. Now, throughout the entire maneuver, you should always keep one hand on the throttle and one hand on the yoke to maintain control of both the whole time. If you do this, you can easily perform the first two steps at the exact same time. Apply max power and relax the backstick pressure on the yoke. Now, the most important part in every stall recovery is to break the stall. And the way we do that is by reducing the angle of attack. Remember, a stall occurs because we exceeded our critical angle of attack. So in most cases, you can actually fix the problem by pitching down or relaxing the backstick pressure. Power can help you out during a stall, but it's not nearly as important as reducing your angle of attack. In addition to that, we're actually performing a power on stall, so in most cases you should already be at max power. I believe that it's important to build good habit patterns though. You might not always be at max power during a power on stall, so pushing the throttle forward to ensure that it is at max is going to allow you to build your muscle memory for every stall that you perform. In addition to that, I like to glance at the carb heat, ensure that it's off, and call it out. Why? Because if the carb heat was accidentally left on, you do not have max power, not even close. This could mean the difference in running into a tree at the end of the runway or climbing out safely. And by glancing at the carb heat and announcing that it's off every time, this is going to build a habit pattern that could save your life. So max, relax, roll. We're already at max power. We've relaxed the backstick pressure. What does roll mean? If you're in a turn, roll out. Now, if you happen to be in a turn during a stall, it's very important that you roll out of the turn after you break the stall. Let's take a second and read something from the Airplane Flying Handbook. Although airflow may still be attached to the wingtips, a pilot should exercise caution using ailerons prior to the reduction of the angle of attack because it can exacerbate the stalled condition. There it is right there, see? You're not supposed to use ailerons! No, it's not saying that. This is saying that it could exacerbate the stalled condition, meaning the stall has already occurred. Feel free to read the entire paragraph leading up to this point if you're not sure. But anyway, what this is actually saying is that after the wings have stalled, this is when we need to be careful about moving the ailerons around too much. Let's continue reading. For example, if the airplane rolls left at the stall or rolls off, and the pilot applies right aileron to try to level the wing, the downward deflected aileron on the left produces a greater angle of attack and more induced drag, and a more complete stalled at the tip as the critical angle of attack is exceeded. This can cause the wing to roll even more to the left, which is why it is important to first reduce the angle of attack before attempting to roll the airplane. Now, in case you haven't already noticed, during the spin recovery procedures, there's actually a step in there to prevent this very thing. As you can see, after we bring the power to idle, the next step is to neutralize the ailerons. We're basically reducing the angle of attack on the wing that is more stalled than the other one. Okay, back to talking about stalls. So immediately after the stall, apply max power and relax the backstick pressure at the same time to break the stall. Once the stall is broken, then roll out of the turn. Now I want to show you something else from the Airman Certification Standards. Notice here that you could possibly be required to perform a turning power on stall during the check ride. Because of that, you need to practice those as well. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but why would the FAA require you to practice stalls in a turn where ailerons are required if they didn't want you to use ailerons during the maneuver? I'm sorry, this lie just irks me to no end. I don't know how it even got started. Anyway, let's take a look at a turning power on stall in the plane.
Okay, for the turning power on stall, We don't have to maintain a specific heading, but we do have to be careful about our bank angle. We don't want to be too aggressive, and it's even more important that we're staying coordinated for this maneuver. Okay, my controls.
Your controls.
My controls. So when you're doing turning stalls, one thing to keep in mind too is that you're going to need more right rudder on a right turning stall, and you might actually need some right rudder on the left turning stall with the high power setting and the low airspeed. All right, so 4,000 feet coming to an eastbound heading. Once again, I don't really care about my heading, but it's a good idea to go ahead and get started on that, staying coordinated. Seatbelts on, fuel selector valve on both, makes your best power. Throttle set, carb heats off. We'll keep the landing and taxi lights off. We'll get a setup here, start slowing us down. We're clear all around. Start slowing us down, looking for 55 knots. Power and pitch at the same time, staying coordinated with 15 to 20 degrees of bank. There it is, max relax. Roll out of the turn. We want to intentionally not use much ailerons until we break that stall. Then as we start building that airspeed up, put that nose back on the horizon, let the airplane climb. That's all there is to that. Now, one important thing about a turning stall is that I do not care about my heading. After I break the stall, I roll out and I recover the aircraft straight ahead. I don't care what heading I'm on. My heading is the least of my concerns at that point. I should be eyes outside, making sure that I'm not going to run into anything.
Okay, so max, relax, roll. That's the initial recovery procedures, but we're still not done after we do that. After we've broken the stall and we roll out, gently bring the nose back on the horizon. Don't pull up too fast. You could easily get yourself into a secondary stall or even an accelerated stall. Smoothly raise the nose back to the horizon and let the airplane start to accelerate and climb. In most situations, the maneuver is complete and you should already have the flaps up. But if you were doing a soft field takeoff or something where you had a notch of flaps in, don't be in a rush to raise those. Let the airplane climb and continue to build airspeed. In this situation, I like to end the same way I do my power off stalls. I like to keep the last notch of flaps in until I'm climbing and I'm flying at VY, which is my best climb speed. In a Cessna 172, that's roughly 70 knots.
Okay, now let's do a power on stall straight ahead. And this time we'll make it to a full stall. Okay, so I'm getting set up here. I've already done clearing turns, so there's nobody out here. The next thing I like to do is the before takeoff checklist. So seatbelts on, fuel selector valve on both. We'll leave the landing and taxi lights off, mix your best power, carb heats off. We are ready for takeoff. Level off at 3,500 here. And so now I'm on 3,500 northbound heading. I am coordinated. And so now what we need to do is we need to slow down to our rotation speed. And I know this seems kind of weird because on a takeoff you're actually going to be speeding up to your rotation speed, but in this case we're going to actually slow down. This is going to make the maneuver so much easier. Alright, so I'm going to just level off here, pull idle power, and then as I start hitting my rotate speed, I'm going to push that power in and pitch the nose up. I'm going to put those crotches right on the horizon. And I've already got a first stall indication right there. So I've got an impending stall going, and now I'm waiting for wing buffeting, which is my second indication. And I'm waiting for that full stall. And there it is. Max, relax, roll out if you're in a roll. Back on the horizon. Carb heat's already off, flaps already up. After takeoff checklist is complete. I'm just maintaining my heading with ailerons and coordinated rudder. It's very important that we stay coordinated. If we're not coordinated, we can get ourselves into a stall spin situation. And that's how you perform a power on stall. My intent for this video was not to call anyone a liar. I just hate when new pilots are fed information that keeps them from improving. I struggled with these maneuvers as a student, and I believe that was a huge reason why I did. I'm here for you guys, so please smash that like button for me, and check this video out right here if you'd like to see 3 secrets that are going to fix your steep turns. Thanks for watching. See ya!